Each fall, tens of millions of Americans spend entire weekends hauling leaves, branches, and wood debris to the curb. We bag it, burn it, pay the city to take it away. We call it cleanup. We treat it like trash. But deep in the Austrian Alps, at 1,500 meters elevation, where hard frosts hit 170 days a year and snow covers the ground for 6 months straight, one man took that same debris, buried it in the earth, and grew citrus fruit. No greenhouse, no drip system, no imported soil amendments. Just lemons, swelling heavy on branches, ripening through winter, while his neighbors could barely keep grass alive. Those beds fed his family through droughts that ran wells dry across the entire valley. They did it for 2 decades without a single watering. Then the state came after him. Sepp Holzer did not start out as a dissident. He started out as a 19-year-old who had just inherited a failing mountain farm and needed it to work. The Krameterhof spread across 24 hectares on the southern face of Schwarzenberg Mountain in Salzburg province. Scientist Dr. Bernd Lutsch, who would later study the farm extensively, called the location Austria's Siberia, and he was not exaggerating. The winds stripped topsoil from exposed slopes. Temperatures stayed below freezing for days on end. Nothing about it was hospitable. Holzer's father had played by every rule. He planted the government-required spruce monocultures. He pruned his fruit trees exactly as the manuals instructed. He submitted to every regulation, and still died leaving the property underwater in debt. Holzer looked at his father's obedience and saw a blueprint for failure. Then he looked at the untouched forests surrounding the farm and saw something different entirely. Abundance that nobody watered, nobody fertilized, nobody managed. Just layered, living, self-sustaining productivity. He made a decision. He would stop mimicking the government's model and start mimicking the forest. He excavated large ponds without filing for permits, using the natural vibration of his excavator to compress the clay bottoms into watertight seals instead of paying for expensive synthetic liners. He let his fruit trees grow unpruned, discovering that free-growing branches flex under heavy snow while pruned ones snap clean. He built terraces out of buried logs and planted citrus and kiwi on slopes where every regulation said he should be growing spruce. The Austrian Agricultural Board did not appreciate any of this. They issued fines for the unpruned trees. They issued fines for the unauthorized ponds. They sent written orders demanding he rip everything out and replant with government-approved species. When Holzer responded, pointing out that spruce needle litter acidifies soil, that shallow spruce roots fail on steep slopes, that his kiwis were producing abundantly while neighboring spruce plantations were being devoured by bark beetles, they fined him again. By the end of the 1980s, he had become the most penalized farmer in the entire country. The fines ran from thousands of shillings into the tens of thousands. When Austria converted to euros, the fines converted with it. A 1986 accusation claimed his water retention structures were creating flood hazards. He paid the penalty, then filed an appeal, arguing his terraces were preventing exactly the kind of runoff the government feared. In 1989, the situation reached a breaking point. The Agricultural Board moved to seize the farm outright. Holzer did not argue. He did not threaten. He invited them to walk the land. "Come taste the lemons," he told them. "Come measure what grows here." What they found was a farm producing 10 times the food per hectare of any neighbor following official guidelines. 10 times, without irrigation, without synthetic fertilizer, without a single bag of agricultural chemical. Inspectors photographed kiwi vines climbing through mountain air, grapes ripening on slopes where everyone else grew only grass, radishes being pulled from beds in December, with the soil underneath still warm from decomposing wood below. They had no regulatory category for what they were looking at. By 1992, something quietly shifted. The fines did not stop entirely, but the seizure threats ended. In 1995, Professor Lutsch and a team from Vienna's Boku University formally certified the Krameterhof as the most documented, consistent example of permaculture practice in the world. Holzer had outlasted them by simply refusing to quit. Every penalty he paid became another data point proving the system worked. In 2002, he published his book, known in English as The Rebel Farmer, and it became a bestseller. Today, he is hired as a consultant from Siberia to Scotland to California to Detroit, teaching the same principles the Austrian government spent 30 years trying to stamp out. At the core of everything he teaches sits one idea that modern agriculture has spent a century ignoring. Deadwood is not garbage, it is underground infrastructure. And here is what makes that idea more than philosophy. It is backed by measurable, reproducible science. Holzer was not operating on intuition or tradition. He was, whether he framed it this way or not, applying physics. And when researchers eventually studied his methods in controlled conditions, the numbers were striking. A Western Kentucky University study tracked hugelkultur beds over a 3-month period and found water retention nearly double that of flat control plots at the same location. Double. Scale that across a full hectare, and those mounds hold 3 to 10 times more water than equivalent flat ground. The Goleta Water District in California ran its own trials and documented a 40% reduction in irrigation requirements compared to traditional raised beds. Gardeners in Oregon and Massachusetts, who have maintained mature beds, report that after a few seasons, supplemental watering becomes unnecessary entirely, even through dry summers. The garden hose stays in the shed, while neighbors run sprinklers every evening. The physics behind it is not complicated. Wood is not metaphorically a sponge. It is literally one, built at the cellular level. Lignin and cellulose form interlocking microscopic tunnels throughout every log. As fungal and bacterial decay opens those tunnels wider, their water-holding capacity increases dramatically. Lab measurements show pine logs in advanced decay absorbing moisture equal to 5 times their dry weight. Oak absorbs less but still doubles or triples its mass with retained water. Stick a moisture probe into a hugelkultur bed during a July dry spell, and the readings will sit at 40 to 60% soil moisture. The bare garden bed 10 feet away will show 15% and wilting plants. The buried logs, soaking up the last rain that fell weeks earlier, are slowly releasing that water upward into the root zone of plants that would otherwise be baking. The most controlled evidence comes from Bug Hill Farm in Ashfield, Massachusetts, where a USDA-funded 3-year study built hugelkultur beds and standard raised beds side by side and measured everything systematically. After 3 years, elderberry plants in the hugelkultur beds had produced 4.03 stems per plant at an average height of nearly 25 inches. The control beds averaged 1.63 stems at just over 10 inches tall. That is a 147% increase in stems and 141% more height. The soil health index improved by 7.67% in hugelkultur versus 4.67% in conventional beds. These numbers were not close. They were not within any reasonable margin of error. They represented a fundamentally different growing environment. Heat adds another dimension. As microbial communities process buried wood, decomposition generates thermal energy, the same exothermic reaction that makes a compost pile steam on cold mornings. Cornell University research documents small-scale organic decomposition reaching 104 to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Fresh hugelkultur beds have been measured at 140 degrees Fahrenheit internally during active decomposition, then settling to a sustained 85 degrees Fahrenheit, while surrounding soil sits at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That 15-degree advantage changes everything in cold climates. Seeds germinate earlier. Spring frosts that wipe out exposed seedlings pass harmlessly over beds insulated by the warmth rising from below. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, growers are putting tomatoes in the ground 2 weeks ahead of their neighbors and harvesting squash well into November. So if this works so reliably, why did we abandon it? The answer has nothing to do with the technique failing. Nobody ran studies and concluded buried wood was ineffective. Nobody discovered it caused problems. The answer is far more mundane. It was incompatible with the tractor. Starting in the 1920s and accelerating through the following decades, mechanized agriculture reshaped every farm in America around the requirements of heavy machinery. Tractors and combines needed flat surfaces, straight rows, and unobstructed passes. Mounds, terraces, ponds, and contoured beds were obstacles. Efficiency stopped meaning fertility per decade and started meaning acres covered per hour. So the landscape got scraped flat. Brush that would have been buried got burned. The living infrastructure of mounded soil, its water storage, its decomposing wood, its fungal networks, its biological diversity, was replaced with blank, level ground that machines could cross without slowing down. That blank ground then needed to be fed artificially. Synthetic fertilizers replaced what rotting wood had provided for free. Irrigation systems replaced the self-watering capacity of buried logs. Pesticides replaced the biological resilience that diverse, mounded soil had maintained naturally. We did not find something better. We found something faster, and then spent the next century paying for everything the old system had given us at no cost. Before you take any of this as permission to bury every log in your yard without preparation, you need to understand what goes wrong, because hugelkultur fails badly when built carelessly. The nitrogen problem is the one that destroys most first-year beds. Gardeners build beautiful mounds, plant everything they want, and watch it all turn yellow and stop growing. This is not a flaw in the system. It is a predictable chemical reaction that is completely avoidable with the right approach. Fresh wood carries an extremely high carbon-to-nitrogen ratio, sometimes as high as 800 to 1. When soil microbes begin consuming it, they need nitrogen to fuel their work, and they will take it from wherever they can find it, including the root zones of your plants. Studies tracking decomposition across 15-year periods show that ratio eventually dropping as low as 16 to 1 in advanced decay, with nitrogen concentration rising from 0.2% to nearly 1%. What starts as a nitrogen drain becomes a nitrogen reservoir, but you need to get there first. The solution is layering. Half your wood should already be partially rotted before you bury it, soft enough to dent with a thumb. Pre-decomposed wood carries fungal and bacterial communities that jumpstart the fresh wood's breakdown and dramatically reduce early nitrogen competition. Fill every gap between logs with smaller branches and twigs, eliminating air pockets that will otherwise collapse into sinkholes as the wood settles. Then add a generous nitrogen layer on top of the wood. Grass clippings, kitchen scraps without meat or dairy, manure from chickens, rabbits, horses or cows, coffee grounds, seaweed if you have access to it. This feeds the microbes directly so they have less need to raid your plants. Cover that with 2 to 4 inches of finished compost, then topsoil, then mulch. In your first season, plant conservatively. Avoid heavy feeders like corn, broccoli, cabbage, and spinach. Prioritize nitrogen-fixing plants, beans, peas, clover, that actively add nitrogen to the system as they grow. Plant squash, potatoes, lettuce, and herbs. If yellowing appears anyway, apply blood meal at 1 to 2 pounds per 100 square feet, or spray diluted liquid fish fertilizer directly on foliage. The mound recovers quickly, and the nitrogen competition resolves itself completely within a season or two. Termite risk stops people cold in Florida, the Gulf Coast states, and tropical Australia. The concern is legitimate and deserves a direct answer. In high-risk zones, Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Queensland, the Northern Territory, subterranean termites can forage up to 150 feet from their colony. Building a buried wood bed carelessly in these areas near a structure is genuinely inadvisable. Keep beds at least 30 feet from any building, and professionals in the most active zones recommend 150 feet. Use partially rotted wood rather than large, solid, dry logs, which are far more attractive for nesting. Check beds and foundation edges regularly for mud tubes. The counterintuitive finding from practitioners in Australia is that mature, biologically active beds may actually deter termites rather than attract them. A decomposition environment already dominated by competing fungi, bacteria, and other organisms may be too hostile for termite colonization. One gardener who maintained over 85 meters of hugelkultur beds for 3.5 years reported no termite activity at all. The risk is highest in new beds with dry, intact logs. As microbial life establishes, the competitive dynamic shifts. In colder northern climates, the upper Midwest, New England, Michigan, Wisconsin, the question is largely irrelevant. Hard winters kill subterranean termite colonies. Slugs in the Pacific Northwest are a more realistic concern. Wood selection is the third critical factor, and it is non-negotiable. Black walnut must never be used. Its roots, bark, and wood contain juglone, a natural chemical herbicide that is toxic to tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, and many other common crops, with effects that persist in soil for 5 to 7 years. Cedar must never be used either. The same aromatic compounds that make it naturally rot-resistant inhibit the beneficial fungi your bed depends on. Black locust and eucalyptus contain allelopathic compounds that suppress surrounding plant growth. Treated lumber, painted wood, and pressure-treated materials leach synthetic toxins directly into soil and food. The reliable choices are hardwoods with moderate decomposition rates. Oak is the benchmark. It releases nutrients steadily over 10 to 20 years and holds moisture exceptionally well. Maple and apple are excellent. Alder breaks down faster and gives more immediate results. Birch retains moisture beautifully. Poplar and cottonwood absorb and release water rapidly. By region, the Pacific Northwest has abundant alder and cottonwood. The Southwest desert can use dead mesquite and palo verde, but avoid fresh mesquite which will sprout. The Southeast does well with oak, maple, sweet gum, and hickory. The Midwest has river bottom cottonwood, elm, ash, and oak. Just avoid black walnut, which grows everywhere there. The Northeast and New England have apple from orchard prunings, birch, maple, and beech. California gardeners should use oak and fruit tree prunings and avoid the tempting abundance of cedar and eucalyptus.